for listening to Uncle Sam's Soccer Podcast, keeping you up to date with the latest in American soccer. And don't forget to subscribe.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to an Uncle Sam Soccer Podcast special. I'm Steven Jotter, and joining me, as always, Armand Kafai. We are actually going to go international. We're going to go down to Argentina and talk about the situation down there with Peter Coates. Now, Armand and I have talked a lot about doing a special like this, and I think it's only a matter of time before we started to expand a little more international. Now, Armand, Argentinian football, how plugged in are we with that?
Not necessarily as plugged in. I mean, the thing is, though, you kind of have to be now, especially as someone in MLS, because a lot of the Argentinians are coming up to Major League Soccer. I mean, Miguel Almiron was signed from Lanús. You have Boca, you have River. You know, they've kind of entered the mainstream with this whole Libertadores battle, and you know the potential coach of Boca could be going to Atlanta United, while the center attacking midfielder River is actually reportedly going to Atlanta United. So, you know, I'm not necessarily as plugged in as obviously the guests we're going to have on today, but I think I'm slowly starting to begin to get plugged in because the influence of Argentinian football is starting to make a big influence on MLS as a whole.
Oh, absolutely. Now let's get to today's guest. Alrighty, listeners, we have a special guest on the line with us. Joining us from Buenos Aires is Peter Coates. You can follow him on Twitter at Golazo Argentino. He is the owner of GolazoArgentino.com, so get your latest Argentinian football news updates on that site. Peter, how's it going?
Yeah, good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, absolutely. Now, to our listeners here in America, Peter, just kind of explain your footballing background and kind of how, you know, what brought you down to Argentina.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been a massive football fan. I'm from England originally. Came to Buenos Aires initially as a teacher some years ago, primarily choosing, or certainly having a huge sway in of deciding to come to Argentina. What was it? Football. And then started Golazo Argentina, the site, when I was here, and then it just gradually grew from there. So I started writing for other places, doing podcasts and that sort of thing, and just sort of gradually increasing the amount of stuff that I tend to do around football here.
Peter, you know, again, for our listeners in America who don't really follow Argentinian football, what is football like in Argentina? What's the passion? What's all that behind it over there?
It's everything. I mean, what we saw, the awful scenes surrounding this Copa Libertadores final is not that uncommon, and it all comes from just this almost uncontrollable passion that people have for their clubs, and that goes beyond just Boca and River. I think, you know, if you speak to almost anyone of any of the clubs in Buenos Aires, certainly if you go to Rosario and speak to, you know, Newell's and Rosario Central supporters, they share that same passion that goes beyond just your average fandom, and you know that has undoubted positives. The match day experience in Argentina is unparalleled, and I think for a football fan, you get an experience like no other by coming to a game in this country. But it does also have its downsides, and as we'll get onto, we have obviously seen that on the largest scale possible at this Copa Libertadores final.
Now, Peter, a lot of people are familiar with Boca Juniors and River Plate, but how does a rivalry like that compare to particularly in Europe? Now, we know there's a lot of social and political ties in Europe, obviously with Barcelona and the political meaning of that club, you know, Celtic versus Rangers, the Protestants versus the Catholics there. And, we understand what the national team like France did in 1998 and now in 2018, 2016 after the terrorism there. But how does football really captivate the political and social dynamic in Argentina?
I mean, Boca River rivalry doesn't have that element of a religious divide like some of the derbies you just mentioned, or even a political one. I mean, there's a the kind of traditional view of the rivalry is one of River being the sort of middle to upper class club based in the sort of quite affluent area in the north of the city, and Boca retaining this sort of working class background, given that they're from a poorer area in the sort of mouth of the river. But the truth of the actual demographic of the two sets of supporters is almost identical, and it's because of the fact that they're so wide ranging. I mean, the numbers of supporters is so much bigger than any other club, and that isn't just in Buenos Aires, but it's throughout the country. So, if Boca go and play a game hundreds and hundreds of kilometers away in the north of the country, in a cup game, for example, they'll have thousands of supporters there. And, so this is something which goes throughout the country, and that's what makes this rivalry so much bigger. I mean, some of the games that I just mentioned there, some of the other big rivalries in the country, the passion in the Clásico in Rosario between Newell's and Central is equal, but it's more or less restricted just to that city, which obviously isn't anywhere near the size of Buenos Aires to begin with, but also it is just more or less restricted to that, while Boca and River not only extends throughout the enormous city that is Buenos Aires, but does actually go throughout the whole country and even further afield, because I think Boca and River have also accumulated supporters across Latin America and maybe even further afield than that.
So with all that context you gave us, where would you rank this rivalry Clásico in club soccer across the world, if you could rank them?
Oh, I'd rank it the biggest. I mean, people might think that I'm biased, but honestly, I just think the scenes and the rivalry, the passion that it produces, it certainly can't be topped. So there's no way that anyone can convince me that El Clásico or Man United, Liverpool, or Galatasaray, Fenerbahce, or whatever it is bigger than Boca River. It's almost impossible to describe the significance of this game, and it was why when the two qualified for the final, why so many people thought, I'm not sure if the country and two sets of supporters will be able to deal with this situation, and it proved absolutely correct.
But so what exactly was the rationale when the two clubs made the final? Why people were so concerned over the two legs being played? And obviously the concern was very real in the way in which it panned out.
Well, I mean, the security for any derby would be huge regardless, but it's worth bearing in mind that in Argentina since 2013 or 2014, we've had a blanket ban on away supporters since Lanús supporter was killed by police in La Plata. So since then, visiting supporters haven't gone to other stadiums. So, for example, in this Libertadores final, even though there was some discussion about allowing away supporters, in the end they agreed to keep it as the regulations would state in Argentina rather than CONMEBOL, which saw Boca have just their supporters in La Bombonera and River was supposed to have just their supporters in Monumental. So that's worth bearing in mind when you want to consider sort of the dangers behind this game, and really why, even though they did try and keep it as best they could to Argentinian regulations, I think with eventually the first leg being a draw, going to the second leg and it still being almost like a one-off game in Monumental, there was too much riding on it, I think, ultimately. Neither side wanted to lose. I mean, this is 100 years of history, fierce rivalry, and yet this one instance was the biggest game in all of that history by some distance. This is the final of the Copa Libertadores, the biggest tournament in South America, the competition that every team in South America wants to win. And so this is the game that, had either side lost, for another 100 years, they'd still be talking about this game. This will be the time that they met in the Copa Libertadores final, and we won, you lost. So there was everything riding on this.
Now, as our listeners know, the second leg of the Copa Libertadores was overshadowed with the bus attacks, and we want to get to those events, but we want to provide some context first. Peter, what are the current economic and political situations like in Argentina right now?
Paul, the economic situation has been bad for quite some time. Inflation is vast, and progressively gets worse. So, and that obviously in turn leads to quite a tense political situation, which again it has been for years. So that's the backdrop of it. I don't know whether that directly has any relevance to this. I know I've read some people suggest that, but I honestly think this game goes beyond that and just sits on its own right. It doesn't really require any more fuel to it.
So if I'm understanding right, you don't think the current situation, like the bus attacks, had anything to do with that, as some people reported, saying, well, look at the political and economic situation. These fans were as much hating the club, but this was also a way to, share those emotions, I guess, for lack of a better term.
Not really. In that we've had problems with Argentine football, and that's why I'm saying it's not specific to this fixture. So some days earlier, there was a sort of riot. Police were getting chased out of All Boys Stadium, which is a third tier club in Buenos Aires. But this is football violence problems that go back years and years and years and years. So I think to tie it into something and say, but it's because the current political situation is odd, because you'd have to say that in that case that it's the current political situation that's been the case for many, many years.
Moving forward to the bus attack, could you explain, because we only saw everything via media, so could you explain a little bit more how it all unfolded and how it really just, I guess, overtook the city and obviously overtook the footballing community?
Yeah, there's a lot of conspiracy theories and what have you, and so we still don't know maybe the full details. All we do know is that Boca's bus had left their team hotel, travelled from their team hotel towards the south of the city towards the Monumental, which is probably 10 kilometers or so to the north, and a few blocks from the stadium. Worth pointing out that that's sort of enough blocks to be outside of River's immediate security zone, and therefore under the control of the city security, the police. They turned down a street which was well known to be where a lot of River fans congregate, and as it went past, got hit by a lot of stuff thrown. The windows got smashed, and I think what was at least most commonly reported as the police were trying to disperse crowds and using all sorts like tear gas and that kind of thing, that then in turn got into the bus. So the images that we saw on the TV when the Boca bus had actually arrived at the Monumental, saw Carlos Tevez and several others sort of choking. There were reports of people vomiting and obviously the effects. So there was cuts with the broken glass, the effects of that gas. And that's kind of all that we saw for sure. So since then, there was obviously a lot of theories about how it was a revenge from the River Barra Bravas, based on a raid earlier in the week, which had seen sort of 300 or 400 tickets seized and millions of pesos. Others about the president of the country, Mauricio Macri, who used to be president of Boca, and therefore him being involved with the police and the police purposefully taking the Boca bus into this area. All of that's conjecture. So the first part of what I said was and what we saw on the TV was the fact.
Now, Peter, I remember I was waiting to watch the match, and then I saw the pictures on social media, of Tevez, looking unwell, of I think Pablo Perez's eye, but it seemed like for the longest time that people like that Colin Ball wanted the game to continue. Why they push? If you know why they push so hard for the game to continue, even though the players obviously didn't want to play. And I think both managers came out saying, hey, we won't play, or Ice Rivers managers came out saying, hey, we won't play if Boca doesn't want to play either.
I think the short answer would be money, as it always is with CONMEBOL and FIFA. And I think, FIFA president Gianni Infantino was in the stadium. This was a game which they had pushed in terms of marketing around to a global audience. It was on a Saturday at a good time for those global audiences. A lot of television rights had been sold around the world, and then therefore this was CONMEBOL's chance to have their showcase event beamed around the world. So for this to happen, suddenly the players to be saying, look, we're not in any condition to play, we don't want to, was I think what led CONMEBOL to try and put their foot down and say, no, you need to play, which was shameful. And just another shameful episode, really, in the whole way CONMEBOL dealt with this.
Now, there was. I'm drawing a blank. I didn't write this question because it just came to me. But there was a player, and I think he might have been on River Plate or even Boca, one of the two. But there was a player basically saying that Argentinian football is being overrun, and moving the final to another country, which it ended up being in Spain, was another example of how Argentinian football continues to be overtaken. Is that the feeling a lot of these players had when they found out the game will be moved to Europe overseas?
I don't know about the players, but I certainly think that would be a very common theme among your average football supporter in Argentina, who over years of poor administration and corruption have seen the Argentinian Football Association make a series of terrible decisions that's affected the game. That obviously goes up the ladder to CONMEBOL as well. So I think the move to the final to Spain was kind of the final, well, maybe not a final, unfortunately, but certainly a significant kick in the you know what. And I think, again, it goes back to money, I think, because ultimately this was the last year we have two two-legged Copa Libertadores final, which, if you speak to anyone in South America, they strongly favour that system because it gives the opportunity for supporters to actually see their club in a Copa Libertadores final. The vast distances in South America, if you then switch to a one-game tournament in a neutral place, potentially rules out thousands of supporters that go to see their team every week from not being able to see their team in the biggest game in their history. So there's that already. But the decision's already been taken to move that to one, and then in this year's to virtually be able to say, okay, well, now we do have a one-off because the first leg was 2-2. So, all right, let's go to the Bernabeu and sell it there again. And, it all kind of stinks a little bit when they're already in place to do that anyway. And I think in the future, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of that, to see, the Copa Libertadores final being sold to the highest bidder.
Peter, how close was the game being moved to the Middle East? I know I heard rumors of that. I think I heard like exuberant, either Qatar Airways or Etihad offering lots of money to the winner and loser in order to have the game played. I forgot, in either Qatar or the UAE. But how close was that to actually fruition?
By all reports, pretty close. I think, again, they needed somewhere to play it. They also had the sort of backup there as well of suggesting that the reason why they might do it is because it's closer to where the Club World Cup's to be played. So, because that starts in just a few days. The idea was, well, we can have both teams out there, play the final of the Copa Libertadores, and then the winner can stay out for the Club World Cup. So at least with that they had that. But I think in reality everyone saw through it, and it was actually, as you mentioned, Qatar Airways or whoever else was funding it just to, as they do with a lot of sporting events in the Middle East, to say, okay, we'll put the money in and bring the game here. So I think, yeah, in answer to your question specifically, I think it was quite close. And by all accounts, it was only when sort of FIFA stepped in and said, how about using Madrid, and they've got the security in place to be able to do it, that it finally settled on a location.
So talk about the game, I guess, on the field. The two teams had a 2-2 draw going into the second leg. What were the expectations? I know, obviously, we know what the result is now, but being away from home, who do you think held the advantage after the bus tag?
Yeah, I don't know if you could say. I think River, as a result, lost their advantage, was all you could say. But I don't know if you'd say, as a result, that anyone took any real advantage into the game. I think River's hindrance, biggest hindrance was the fact that Rafael Santos Borré, the Colombian forward, got booked in the first leg, so he was suspended for this one. But other than that, the two teams had players back from injury, more or less. They're more or less picking their best sides, and because it was in a neutral venue with home and away supporters, there was no real sense of someone going into this as favourite. So it did sort of, in a way, help CONMEBOL be able to push this as like La Gran Final, as they dubbed it, because it was able to take on just very much a sense of a one-off final in a neutral location.
Peter, what'd you make of Quintero's strike in extra time? That was phenomenal. Yeah,
I mean, he's such a great player and such a joy to watch. It's always frustrating, as a non-River fan when he's not in the starting 11, because I love watching him play. He's just someone that can make things happen with his eye for a pass ordinarily, and just his little drops to the shoulder to give him the space. So although you wouldn't necessarily pencil him in as the match winner, his goal today was sensational. Just gave him that tiny little pocket of space on the edge of the box, and that one touch to set himself, and devastating strike.
So moving forward, what does the victory mean for River Plate? And coming back to Argentina, and what will Argentina do to ensure that that's kind of hard to say now, but future events are more tamed?
Well, the first part of that, I would say, for River, it means everything still. It's the fourth time they've won the Copa Libertadores. I don't think they'll be looking at this as anything other than just a great triumph. I think for the rest of the country, it's going to forever be a tournament which was tainted, and not just by the final, the fact that it ended up in Madrid, the fact that there was the bus attack, and Boca is obviously probably still going to go to the Court of Arbitration for Sport to contest the fact that they were even having to play the second leg. But before that, there was a series of very questionable VAR decisions. There was also the whole mess surrounding suspended players and CONMEBOL not correctly telling clubs of suspended players, and then therefore ineligible players playing in games, and teams getting awarded walkovers, other teams not being punished. So the whole of this year's tournament was a mess prior to the final. So in many ways, it got the final it deserved. But I think as a result, it's going to be a year which, for a lot of people, it's kind of like, I just want to forget about this, because it was just a terrible, terrible advert for South American football. And what was the second part of that question? Like, sort of how Argentina moved forward?
Yeah, just what does this mean? I mean, a lot of conversation, at least here in America, is about, maybe MLS should market to these players that the conditions here in America are safer and they're better. And I just don't know if that's a big selling point to some of these players because they love their club so much.
No, I think it is. I think it is this quality of life. I think it is a factor, and I think it is something that you can sell to players from an MLS standpoint. And that's not just because of crowd violence per se, but sort of security in general in the city. Those economic factors that we mentioned earlier are obviously a big factor. Clubs not paying on time, all of this kind of professionalism that within the MLS has an advantage in that sense. The league controls the pay, so there's no factors there of the club sort of not having the money. So that is a big selling point. Whether Argentina can really do anything to improve their act is a much bigger question, and I think I would be one of the majority to be very skeptical that they will. The problem with football violence has been one that's been around for years, shows no sign of being under control. I think the attitude after the River attack and the fact that no one really has been held accountable for it suggests that. And that's the thing. I think unless you have all the clubs, all of the clubs, CONMEBOL, AFA, the police, the government, make a joint effort to try and stamp out the problem, then it's not going to go away. So unfortunately, I think for Argentine football, it will remain the same. But as you mentioned, there it is probably a boost for a club, for a league like MLS to offer an alternative.
And I want to follow up with the MLS point. With the rise of South American players in Major League Soccer. I mean, we saw Atlanta win MLS Cup yesterday with Tata Martino as head coach, and they're looking to potentially attract another South American. Do you think every team in MLS kind of has that appeal for maybe some players in Argentina, or is it specific few such as an Atlanta United or the team that kind of has like a South American feel?
I think that helps certainly to sell the club. I think Atlanta had money, which was obviously an important factor, being like a sort of relatively new franchise. They were able to use not only Tata's knowledge, but his profile to attract South American players. And then obviously once one or two come in, and certainly even more so once the club has success, then it opens the door to others, because they'll look at that and say, okay, well, I've seen players go there and thrive. So that's one factor. And then obviously there are other factors in terms of the location of the club. I think, places like LA or New York are going to have an attraction of their own, more so than perhaps some of the lesser known cities in the middle of the States. And that's not me being negative towards any of those places, but I just think if you're a South American footballer with the opportunity to go and live and play in somewhere like New York over, I don't know, Columbus or something, then there's an obvious attraction there. And I'm not, as I say, I'm not being negative towards Columbus, but there's an advantage, say, to being located in somewhere like New York.
Don't worry, Peter. We've said on this show, at least, we've said a lot about Columbus. So, Peter, we really appreciate the insight. I think this was a fascinating development, obviously coming from Argentina, because it suddenly was, let's talk about Argentinian football, and people don't realize this isn't just a one-off thing. This has a history of fans going back and forth, and really want to thank you for your time and just give you an opportunity to go ahead and just plug, your work and your site and anything else that you do.
It's been a pleasure. But what you mentioned earlier, to be honest, if you go to my Twitter, which is @GolazoArgentino, you'll see all the stuff I do there. So, the link to the site's there. Whenever I get around to recording the podcast, the links are on there. That's enough. I'm not really one for self-promotion.
No, we understand. Thanks again, Peter. Thank you.
All right, pleasure.
Well, Armand, that was just very fascinating. I've had I've had a couple people from Argentina talk about Boca versus River, but I don't think people understand the historical meaning behind a rivalry like that. And it's not just to say it's Boca River. I mean, it's just Argentinian football in general.
I just want to say, like, I don't know what it is with me and being right recently.
Oh my
but,
God.
But I am. I think I said on the show, either on the show or in private, that MLS could offer something to Argentinian football, and Steven was like, "Nah."
No, I was just a little hesitant. I just don't know.
I think MLS, and I think Almiron came from Lannis. I think I mentioned this before the interview with Argentina. And look, with Pity Martinez, potentially, he's a star, guys. I don't think you guys understand. This guy's a star. He could be going to Europe right now and have an immediate impact. He's coming to Atlanta United. Overall, Argentinian football might be infiltrated by MLS in terms of MLS looking to pick up talent from there, because it's a little underrated over there. And, a lot of things that MLS can offer, Argentinian football just can't.
Well, I think MLS has a lot to offer, but so does Europe. Like, let's not get wrong. Let's not say MLS is better than Europe.
Right. It's more of, if you're not good enough to go to Europe, but you're like better, you're really good.
Yeah.
You can move on, and then you can use that to go to Europe.
And I think we're still waiting for that player to make that big jump. Now, Almiron, if he goes and is somewhat successful at Newcastle and he gets a deal there,
or
whoever, then I think the floodgates open. Now it's just baby steps before you can start to go down and nag all these excellent players. I mean, the game itself was fun to watch. I know Peter said the first half was a bit slow, but the goals were just beautiful. I mean, South American football is something else to watch sometimes. I mean, you could see
all the styles are so distinct, man.
Yeah,
like that's the thing that blows my mind. You go watch MLS, it's not like Liga MX, and it's not like Premier League, and it's not like football in Argentina or South America. They're all so different, and I think that's what makes. I know I might be a little cliche, but makes what soccer so unique is you have all these different unique playing styles. So you're seeing, it's like you go to Mexico, you're going to see a much more rougher, fast tempo game. I think MLS is kind of like that, but a much lesser scale.
But you see it in Europe too.
You see so many different aspects. I just find it like Atlanta and Portland is not going to be like, it's going to be on. It's already going to already happen by the time the show comes out. Pumas and America in Liguilla. It's not going to be the same. I find that I always find that phenomenal every single time I think about that. But the game was great. But it felt like a Champions League final, Steven? Like that one-off neutral venue. And I think, honestly, FIFA really pushed for this neutral venue match just outside the country, the federation's lines to, I think, test out, put the Champions League in America. Put it at MetLife. I really hope they don't. But
no. I mean, the Champions League is already not being, they already predetermined the location. So if it happens to be in Madrid and Real Madrid get there, the ticket allocation is still split up between the two clubs. So
Right.
But
I outside of Confederation.
Yeah, no, you're right in that regard. I just don't know that Europe will do it because of money, while Argentina will have the dollar sign obviously carry a lot of weight, but there's also security reasons and a ton of other influences that make that determination. While in Europe, security is not that big of a threat, depending majority of the time. Now you do have instances in Europe where, like, a Liverpool traveled to Belgrade and Shaqiri, because the game is played in Serbia, did not make the travels because he didn't want the tension. So there are instances in Europe where, people and security is a threat. It's just not like anything in Argentina. And MLS should really push the, not safety, but just more of the fact that there is not peace, Armand. I'm looking for a proper word here. Just like calm, consistency,
like
civility. Yeah. And it's something that will be intriguing to see where we go.
I agree. I have no idea where it's going to go. But this was a big stain on Argentina football and what was exciting. To be honest with you, I wasn't even that excited for the game anymore. To be quite honest with you.
When we found out about the final, I mean, I know you, me, and Jake were excited. Twitter was excited. Everybody was talking about it. I mean,
but
you know,
now,
if you know soccer, you know the name Boca Juniors and River Plate.
Yeah, if you don't, then you need to work on that.
Anyway, listeners, follow us on Twitter, Uncle Sam Soccer Pod. This was an Uncle Sam Soccer Podcast special. We'll be back to the normal next episode.